Okay. Hi, and welcome back to Poltergeist Board Games. Today, I had the pleasure of having Jonathan Kelly, who is a game book writer, and he has a new Kickstarter for the Flesh Thieves of Karnov Tath. I hope I said that right.
You did.
Okay. And this is an adult fantasy slash horror game book. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining me.
No worries. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So this is your fourth book that you're doing. And right now you have 23 days left in your Kickstarter. You have $2,539 raised out of your goal of 2,713. So you were super close to your goal. And you have 70 backers, which is good.
Yeah, it's going good so far. I've done this Kickstarter a little differently than my previous ones because in the previous ones I set a very low funding threshold and I achieved that within 24 hours, which is
Mm,
good because it gives confidence. But with this one, because I'm basically employing four artists, so I knew that my costs were going to be exponentially higher, and I didn't want to do a Kickstarter and then have to pay all those costs and be out of pocket. So it's a little stressful because I'd love to be funded and then we could relax and just enjoy the process.
yeah.
But no, we've done fantastically well. I never take for granted the fact that, people all over the world, people who've never met me, possibly never read anything I've done, are putting their faith in me to produce a book. And although I've got a good track record now, because this is my fourth one, as you say, and my previous three funded and were delivered on time, it's still, yeah, it still amazes me that this can happen and that this process allows people like me to do something from nothing and hire artists and, produce something for the field, which I think is important because we need new blood and we need new ideas and content. And we'll talk about that later, maybe a bit, because the collector market for game books is huge, but they're all nostalgic, and people are spending huge money on the things that they had when they were a kid.
Mhm.
But that doesn't always translate into being willing to take a risk to support somebody new like myself. So, yeah, Kickstarters are good because it gets the word out, but it's a difficult task. It's not always easy to like spread the word and get new people to kind of come on board.
Yeah. So you let me look at the fantasy book called The Trials of King Arnak.
That's
And
right.
so I have to say the first um time I went through it, I uh fell off an embankment and um my trials were over before they began. I
Yes.
didn't even get into the city. Um
That
so
that
I
that,
played it a second time and got a little further, but the Thin Man got me. Um, so then, I'm now in my third trial or third time, and took a little different route around the Thin Man because I knew that was a bad avenue. But day one of the trial so far. So
Okay, excellent.
I'm,
You've done well
I'm
to get there.
I'm getting through it. It's so what I like about these game books is, and I haven't seen these before, but they remind me of, like you said, childhood choose your own adventure. I had these bunch of these choose your own adventure books when I was a kid, and I loved them, because it was like, you know, yes, exactly,
I've got
exactly.
props.
So perfect. Yes. So that's exactly what these remind me of. And but you have a little, some dice rolling like in the very beginning. I don't know if there's any more, because I'm, still making my way through. But it's very fun. I enjoy it. The writing really is descriptive and very, you can picture yourself in the moment and in the scenes. The artistry is excellent. Like that picture of the Thin Man. Every time I see him, I'm like, ooh, keep scrolling because he's pretty I'll put pictures from your book in on the video here as
Thank you.
plays. But yeah, the Thin Man, that's very well done, and the other pictures I've seen, the artistry is very, very well done.
Well, there's a number of things I can follow up there, but I'll start with your first comment that you died straight away. That was a very deliberate in joke that I basically like to subvert the idea of what you're going to do. And game books can be tough, historical game books like the Choose Your Own Adventure books. This is one of my childhood copies. So this is one of the books that I loved when I was a kid. It was weird because I was very scared by horror genre as a kid, but I kind of gravitated towards it. This was about the level I could cope with at that age. Um, but yeah, I like to throw the reader off balance a bit and put a few kind of tricksy parts in that you're gonna come a cropper basically. I don't know whether you have that phrase where you live, but I like, for me, part of the fun of game books is when you meet a sticky end. And although technically, the Trials of King Arnak is a all ages book, so it's kid friendly, and I didn't put anything in there too gruesome. Um, yeah, I think if you fall off a cliff, I think you know what's going to happen. Although I think I do say that you do survive. But yeah, going to the artistry, that's a huge part of my love of game books. The artists that they employed in the 80s for series like Choose Your Own Adventure, which I've shown you, Fighting Fantasy. This is a huge influence. The artistry in these books is amazing. And I love, black and white art. I'm a huge comics fan. I've collected art on a minor scale because I haven't got any money. But yeah, there's two, excuse me, there's two starting points for the book that you are reading at the moment. One was my friend's daughter, Emmy, who I credit in the credit section of the book. She devised some top trumps. I don't know whether you have top trumps there, but they're like a card game, like a swapping card game where you have like powers and you have to try and beat the other person's powers. And they're very popular in England. So my friend's daughter drew some creatures for her own version of horror top trumps. And I'd had the idea during COVID of writing a book. And then I saw her top trumps. Her dad showed them to me. And I kind of asked for permission. I said, well, I'm thinking about doing this book, so why don't I put her monsters in my book? And I kind of needed something to give me a spur to write it. I've been saying for decades that I would write stuff. I have written certain things. I was published in my local newspaper doing film reviews. I wrote for a horror film website for a while, but I never could stick with it. And the only motivator for me was if I was getting paid. And I don't want to make that sound like I'm a mercenary, but writing is boring. I don't like sitting down for hours on end in front of a keyboard. I'd rather be watching a film or playing a game or walking my dog. There's a huge amount of things I prefer than the actual physical art of writing. But I do love creating. I love creating in my head. I love the idea of making up monsters, and I've always thought up stories in my head, and I never got around to writing them. So Emmy creating these creatures, me thinking I've got nothing to do during COVID, because I was in England, we had what was called shielding. So if you were high risk of COVID, or they suspected you were high risk of COVID, they put you in the shielding group and you couldn't work. You got furloughed from your employer, so they paid you to not work, basically. So I was in that category. So I had nothing to do, and I was like, right, if you're not going to write now, you never will. So I took her ideas, and then it was a question of finding the artists. And that was just, people say to me, well, how do you find these guys? Well, you just look at them on Facebook. They share their art. They put posts up of, if you join groups and if you're into fantasy art, you'll see lots of artists putting their stuff up online. And then all you do is you message them and say, how much will it be if you do this for my book? It's not rocket science. And I really, we'll talk about it later maybe, but I don't like AI. And I don't like the laziness of AI, but also I don't like the fact that if you put an AI cover on your book, you're not paying an artist. To me, it's a collaborative effort. It's a community, and I want to pay artists to produce brand new art that the reader hopefully enjoys. And, everybody benefits that way. So, yeah, The Thin Man was drawn by a gentleman who's a friend of mine called Hui Truong. and he lives just around the corner from me. Weirdly enough, I've known him for years. Um, and he does a lot of, well, he did a lot of work with the trading card companies when they do sketch cards.
Hmm.
And you know, they're really hard to find. If you buy trading card boxes, you probably have to buy 12 boxes to get a sketch card. They're rare. Unfortunately, the artists get paid peanuts for doing them, but they build an audience and people. So Hui got really big on the Star Wars scene because he was doing trading cards for Star Wars tops.
Hmm.
And so he got a name. So yeah, I'm very lucky to have him. And he did the Thin Man, which I think is one of the best pieces in the book. It's a beautiful piece. And the other artist is Huago, who's a Spanish artist who sadly I've never met because, you know, he's not come over to England. I've not been to Spain, but he's a brilliant talent. Different styles, but I like that to mix it up and, you know, give the reader a little bit extra. Yeah, that was a very long answer to your question. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's good. So I've seen other game books because I'm mainly like war games and you know, like sports games and things. So this is kind of outside of my expertise, so to speak. But I've seen some that are like D66 or like D20.
Yep.
Is yours in a category like that, or is
No.
it
So
something different?
I've deliberately kept mine relatively simplistic. So there's no battle combat systems, which most, you know, game books have. And so when you said about choose your own adventure, they're similar in that, in the sense that they are, you know, more linear, you know, pathing branchway novels. But I'm getting more confident with each book. So in my last book, I had a system called the paranoia meter. And so because you're an undercover agent and you joined a cult, so your paranoia could go up or down depending on your choices. And if you were too cocky, that wasn't good. If you were too safe, if you played it safe all the time, that wasn't good. And if you reached the threshold higher or lower, then bad things could happen to you because you were going to get caught out, basically. So I'm trying to introduce new things. I've resisted to me, if you were in a battle, you know, it's not down to dice rolls. It's down to your decision making. You
Mhm.
know, so the fighting in King Arnak is, are you going to try and hit their legs or are you going to try and hit their head? And the information you've been given about the enemy is going to have an impact on what your decision is. Not luck. You know, you've got to try and strategize your way through a battle. And that, to me, that's not about rolling dice because that's completely arbitrary. You know, and to be honest, when you said at the beginning about reading it and dying straight away and you trying again, I mean, that's one. Oops, drop one of my books. That's one technique of playing. The other technique is, of course, you cheat and you keep your finger in the last page, and you a little bit more difficult if you're doing it digitally. But then you just, you know, you just go back and you do the other choice. And I guess that's how I played game books when I was a kid. I wasn't beholden to the rules. I wasn't starting again all the time. I just liked the adventure, and if I made a mistake, I was just like, well, I'll do something different. Um, but yeah, no, there are the Fighting Fantasy series, which in England was the big one. I think in America, Fighting Fantasy was popular to a degree, but not on the scale of Choose Your Own Adventure. Um, but in England, Fighting Fantasy was huge, and they have converted a lot of the books into what I would consider like more hardcore role-playing games that you can use with dice systems. Um, and there's a, you know, there's a huge market for that. I just wouldn't know how to do that.
Mhm.
If someone says to me, "Oh, I'll convert your book into a, you know, into a D series," I'd be like, "Okay, that's fine." But I couldn't do that myself.
So what I like is that and you know, gamers, you know, the more I'm getting into gaming and finding out that, like you said, gamers don't like the dice rolling as much as they like decisions. They like a game with decisions where the player actually has to choose, you know, the outcome rather than a dice roll, you know, deciding your fate. And I think that you reflect that very well, you know, because you know, in some cases you have two decisions, you know, so, you know, if you, like you said, okay, I made the wrong decision there, I can go back and make this decision. But in other instances, you have like 7 decisions that you can choose from. So, that's that's a lot of forks in the road. So I think it's really um, well thought out that you have so many choices that you put in the book, and you give the player different options, and it's good to see this, as a gamer who likes to make their own decisions. But
Yeah, well, there's two things to say about that. One, I like moral choices, and the more I've written, the more I try and put these kind of bigger moral choices in. When I was a kid, a lot of game books revolved around going down a dungeon, and do you want to go left or right? And as
mhm.
an adult, yeah, of course, sometimes you have to have like, those kind of choices in your books. But I prefer a decision that's gonna, profoundly impact your quest or your adventure further down the line that you know nothing about. So I don't want to give away any spoilers, but there's certain things, in my book, The Green Apocalypse, there's, I won't say what it is, but there's a character that you meet that if you're not nice to it at the beginning, there's no way you can be successful in the book right at the end. You can play the whole book, you can do 99% of the book, but if you've made the wrong ethical choice, further back, then you're going to find your options are limited, and the hero ending is not going to be, um, an option for you. And I think that in terms of trying to make the reader invest in the book, that's what you need. You need something a bit more tangible. The other thing I can say about that was that book that you're reading now was so difficult to write. The mapping system was all over the shop. I complicated it massively by having night times and everything resetting after you go to sleep. And there's a reason for that, which you might not have discovered yet in your read through, so I won't spoil it. But it was so difficult. I got myself in so many knots trying to work out, well, if we go here, what day are we here with this option? Because like you say, if you've got 7 options, you're going to keep track of all of them. It's like, yeah, ridiculously hard. So I did, when I wrote the first book, because I didn't do a Kickstarter for that one, I just wrote it and then I thought I'd try and sell it. And there was a market for that because I had a good response within the game book community. Um, so with that book, I actually did an expanded edition. And to be honest, it slipped my mind which one I sent you. I think I sent you the expanded edition. Yeah, it is the expanded edition because it's illustrated. So my first book had a cover done by a fighting fantasy artist, but it wasn't illustrated inside. So I did a Kickstarter for the same book, but expanded it, made it bigger. Yeah, I kind of learned a lot on that first one about, if you're going to try and make these kind of like shifts in time and place, you have to be really, really careful with what you're doing in terms of the planning and recording of the information about how it all maps together. And I've got better at that. The only thing I would say, if you're reading the basic edition, I think you can you can see the exact point where I lost interest in writing it, because it was just like, right, let's wrap this together. It's just absolutely bamboozled my brain. With the edition you're reading, it's not like that because it has more meat to the bones.
So tell me about your creative process. Like, how do you go about designing these? Is it like with a map system? Do you do I told a friend of mine about how, about this book, and, like how, um, you know, how neat it was, that it's like a choose your own adventure. And he said that he had written one a while back, but never, finished it. But he said he uses a thing called Twine, and it shows like all the different avenues and ties them together. And I was like amazed at that app.
Yeah, that's cheating. No, I'm so old school and I'm so anti-technology. To be perfectly honest, if I had my way, we'd be doing this interview by post, probably pigeon post, because I don't like technology in any form. I've adopted them only because I've had to, but I don't think that they're of any benefit to humanity that's a bigger picture story. But I'm totally, I don't use any technology when I write these. So what I do is I start writing, and whenever I use a number, I write it at the back of the book. And then as I write, if I've got two choices, then I put those numbers in the book and I put a little synopsis of what they're following on from. So if, say, the choice is, do you want to steal this jewel or do you want to leave it? Then I just put steal section 238, leave section 439. And then as I go through, I just keep handwritten notes. I mapped my second book because the geography, it was a haunted house book, and so I had to know how the house fitted together. So I
Mm.
actually made a hand-drawn map when I was writing that one, just so I could see how many rooms down a corridor. I didn't want to have 6 rooms in one corridor and 8 rooms in another corridor. So I'm very logical, and I'm hopefully, I've never had anybody come back to me and say something doesn't make sense in my book. Um, you know, and that's the biggest risk of game book writing, is that you have a dead end, or that you set something up, 100, chapters before, and you don't follow it through. That's risky. And so, yeah, I'm kind of slow and methodical, totally old school. And just that seems to work now. With the numbering system, the biggest problem is when you get to the end, because you don't want to bunch all your choices together. So if the next choice is on the same page, then obviously you can, see what's going to happen. So I use a system where I try and space everything out by 10, because I think if you've got 10, paragraphs, then there's no way that's going to be on a page, not with the way I write, because I'm quite descriptive, like you say. So yes, I don't mind it now. The first one, as I say, was so difficult. It really like overloaded my brain. But once I'd learned how to do it, and I'd got a system in place, the subsequent ones I found easier, but also, even as I've complicated them myself with more rules and more kind of like recording of, like the morality meter, um, I found that relatively easy to do. So it's just practice with anything. If you practice, you get better at it.
Mm.
And I know that there are probably current game book writers out there who are writing hands down much more complicated and involved systems than mine. But there's a market for that. Those people that like that sort of stuff. I've gone the other way, and I've kind of tried to make my books a little bit more simplistic, in approach and playability, but I think they've still got meat on the bones in terms of content and creatures and, memorable encounters.
So let's talk a little bit about AI, because my son, he's an artist, and he is in the same boat as you. He hates AI. He thinks this exact same when you said that you would rather pay an artist to do the work, and the AI is lazy, and it was exactly like what my son said, that he can't stand AI. Um, do you think AI has a place at all in game creating?
I, I don't want to come across as so hardline that I'm, blinkered. But I grew up loving artists, and I also grew up with the idea that you pay for what you love.
Mhm.
You're not a fan of a band if you download their music for free illegally. You're not contributing to that band.
Yeah.
You weren't a fan of a film director if bought the hooky, illegal video pirate tape back in the day. This is not a new concept. The problem with AI, and you could go on a group within 1 minute and see this, is people think that they are doing something, that they are creating something. And it kind of appeals to people's egos. But I see, scrolls and scrolls of AI art that people put on groups that have got no likes, no comments, because you can just literally regurgitate this stuff out endlessly. It takes zero time. And yeah, I don't. if you're saying to me, "Oh, I'm a struggling writer. I've got 4 kids. I can't afford to pay an artist," you haven't gone to the right artists and asked them how much you could do some art for. The art on my last book, I got my sister's husband's daughter to do. Now, she did it for free, but it wasn't free because I gave her a book as a present on an artist that I know she liked. I gave her my book for free, and I gave her back the art, which she can sell. I tried to sell it. Unfortunately, I didn't sell it. But so even within that remit of, well, I'll do it for you for free, I was giving her something for her time and trouble, along with some publicity. Now, there are solutions. If you say I can't afford it, then go to somebody and say, well, would you do it for free? But maybe I'll back end you if it sells, or I'll do something for you for free. It's a barter system. That to me is better than using AI. It's more collaborative. It's more community minded. So yeah, I just, I don't like it because I grew up with great artists. I could spend 4 hours telling you about fantastic artists that I love, and at the end of that 4 hours, you'd love them too, and you might not have seen their art. But I'd be so descriptive in how powerful they were, and how creative they were, and how they broke new ground. And yeah, to me, it's about, are you proud of what you're creating? Then, if you're proud of your writing and you want to charge someone money, and this is the thing, this is the thing. If you use AI art on your book and you give your book away for free, then I've got no problem with it. That's an aesthetic choice. I don't personally like the style of AI art, but that's fine. But the minute you start charging people as a writer, when you've got an AI cover and you've got, AI illustrations in your book, you're saying, I'm valuable, but the artist isn't. And I don't believe that. I believe the artist is valuable. And in fact, I'd say the artists are more valuable than me in the process of, getting backers for my books. Because I know for a fact, when I did my first book, people were buying it for the cover. They didn't know if I could write. They didn't know if I could put, 2 words together. So, the fact that I had commissioned an artist and paid for hand-drawn art, that was what drew people in. So yeah, I'm there could be solitary situations where AI art, was necessary because the person literally had no budget, and that fit the remit of what they were doing. But generally, I'm not for it, as a principle of, I want to support artists, and I think human art is better, of course.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no worries.
My son will be happy to hear that answer.
Well, you need to send your son to send me some illustrations of the art. In fact, let me just say this, and I'm not giving you or your son the hard sell, but in my first Kickstarter, I put in a pledge, which I'd never seen anybody else do, which is put your art in the book. So they paid me £50, and they supplied me with the hand-drawn art, and I published it in the book. And 2 people did that, and one of them was Hui, who we've already discussed, and I've subsequently paid him to be the artist in my following books, and Hamad Al-Najjar, who's a Bahrainian artist. He did it, and I'm now employing him, as long as this book funds, to provide art for this book. Now, there's no guarantee that would happen again, because I might never be able to fund another book. But those people who paid me to put their art and be a little showcase for their talent are now being hopefully paid again by myself to produce art. So, I'm not someone who talks about art in a, kind of like grandiose way. I want to put my money where my mouth is. Most game books don't have 4 artists.
Yeah.
They might have more art, because some people are really generous when they, I don't think they make any money, mind, but they're very generous, because some game books are crazy. They've got tons of art. They might have more art than mine. But, nobody can say that I don't support artists with, what I'm doing.
Yeah. No, that's definitely evident in your books. All right. So I have less than 10 minutes, about 8 minutes. So let's talk about So this book, your latest Kickstarter,
Yep.
in there you say that it's kind of like mapped out but not completed. How far after, like, say, the Kickstarter would you release?
Okay, so again, I do this completely differently than most, kind of people in the field, I guess, because they tend to write their stuff and then they do a Kickstarter and they're kind of going to publish it anyway. I'm different. This only happens if we get 100% funded, and I only write the book when the Kickstarter is finished and we guaranteed to have the funds. And again, that's not because I'm the most mercenary person in the world, but because I need that motivation, and it makes me better at writing to know that actually people have paid for it. So each of my books has got bigger. I don't think this book, I'll show you my last book because I got a copy here. I don't think this book will be as big as my last one. This is The Green Apocalypse.
Okay.
This is a sci-fi, and it's quite, by my standards, for an A4 book, it's pretty thick. And this one I don't think will be as big because there's less that you can do. Like this, it's based around the idea of the seven deadly sins, but there were actually a Greek version of those that predated the kind of Christian concept of the seven deadly sins, and there were actually 9 of them. Although mysteriously, I can only find 8. I've been researching feverishly to try to find out what the ninth was, but I haven't been able to find it. But they said that there were 9, then they became 8, and then they got kind of converted down to 7 deadly sins. So really, that kind of limits what this book is, kind of going to be about, because the idea is that you were part of a sacrifice and you weren't supposed to survive, but you did, and that around the kingdom people have your cubes of flesh that were cut from your body. It's a bit of a grim idea, but
That's the flesh thieves.
yeah, this is the payoff of this is that the land is a utopia. It's a paradise. And although you don't know why that is, there's no crime, there's no violence, there's no swearing, there's no, adultery, there's nothing. So you enter this book at basically the perfect position. And I call it a reverse game book, because really the best thing you can do is just not go on your quest. Because the minute you go on your quest, you start potentially unleashing chaos within the world, because you are going against the status quo. You're going against the normalcy. And in terms of moral choices, I don't think that you can get a better kind of like scenario for, well, once you start realizing what's happening, if you find your flesh, you can put it back in your body, which creates crazy kind of consequences. There's a non-playable character who's going to follow you around, who's kind of like the comedic relief, but he's quite important. You can give it to him to look after, and you don't know what's going to happen with that. You could just, not collect them. You could change your mind halfway through. So yeah, it's kind of like, I think it's a fascinating idea, but I don't need to have written it to know what's going to happen. It's in my brain. All of my previous books were exactly the same, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I haven't mapped out every room, every encounter, because I don't need to, because that will flow. When I start writing it, I know the first thing you're going to do, you have to go and see this gentleman called Endurk the Undying, who's this like 700-year-old man who's like basically the gatekeeper of what's happening in the world now, but he has no memory of what the world was like before these kind of sacrifices started and what created this thing. So once you meet him and you meet your companion, then everything flows from there, and yeah. So the downside to this is people have to wait, and I wish that they didn't, but they have to wait for me to write it, but they also have to wait for the artists. And one thing you soon learn if you start commissioning artists, always allow more time. If you set a deadline, that's not always going to be guaranteed to be met. And that's not a criticism, but these guys are crazy busy and they have, other jobs, or they have other commissions and better paying commissions than me probably that take priority. So yeah, the process of this book, hopefully it will fund in August. I will start writing it straight away. And then the process of the Kickstarter is that I update everybody every month. So, you know, the publishing date, the posting date is March 2025. And yeah, I'm sure there are people who don't want to back a Kickstarter that's not ready to go. So I cut myself off from a section of the potential audience by doing it this way. But it's worked for me so far. I've written 3 books on time, as I said, posted on time. So, you know, I'm doing something right. But it's a little different. There's one guy who lives local to me as well. He's a good chap, and he does another series called Talamander. And God, he's so quick. I mean, he's caught up with me already in I think about a year and a half, and he's like his book's ready to go. So yeah, he makes me look really lazy, but it is what it is. And like I
But
say,
you need that, you know, where you know, like you said, you have it in your mind, and you know that once you start going, it will automatically flow.
yeah, absolutely. And also the responsibility to the audience. Those people have paid you, you know, up front, which is even better. You know, if I went down my local high street and I set up a table and I put my books down, you know, some people might like the art, some people might just be interested and say, "What's this?" That's great. That's appreciated. If I sold books that way, that would be wonderful. But the true heroes are the people who, you know, pledge their money up front and make something happen, like I say, from nothing, because they're putting their faith in me. And I take that as a severe responsibility. The other thing I should say, and this is for people who've been burned by Kickstarters, because I don't know whether you've ever backed a Kickstarter or a crowdfunder that didn't work.
But I have
Yeah.
only because I'm very cautious on them,
Yeah.
because I've heard stories, but the one that I did back, I knew it was from a reputable gaming company, and I knew the game, you know, was going to come out, you know, soon, because they already had the game done.
Okay.
So
So basically, there are people like myself who have been burned by crowdfunding, and they can go one of 2 ways. They can say, well, I'm never doing it again. Or they can say, well, that's just part and parcel of the risk of everyday life. And if you were involved in a car accident and you said, you know, you have a minor car accident, you said, well, I'm never going to, you know, get in a car again, then to me, that would be a bit of an extreme reaction. And I often say online to people, you know, Kickstarters, crowdfunding are about research and about, you know, feedback. So it's very easy if you see a crowdfunder that's asking for 50 grand and they've never backed a campaign themselves and they've never done a campaign before, that's a huge red flag. A, because they might not make 50 grand. B, if they can't be bothered to spend their own money on crowdfunders, why would you give them your money? And B, C, sorry, you know, it's like, you know, do you want to buy off eBay from somebody who's got 1,000 positive feedback or somebody with 0? You know which one, you know, if you've got a choice of the same book, you know which one you're going to buy from.
all
You
right,
know,
I
from,
got like 20 seconds left. Sorry.
oh
So
no, that's fine.
I'm gonna have to, I'll have to cut it short here. But
No worries.
thank you so much for giving your time and coming on my channel. I wish you success in your Kickstarter, and you know, I wish you well.
Thank you, Scott. It's been really